Hello and welcome to yet another tutorial by Davies Media Design. My name is Michael Davies, and today I'm going to be showing you guys how to create a gradient poster in the style of Magdiel Lopez. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Lopez's work, basically what he does is he takes shapes with gradients in them and he combines them usually with a photograph with the background removed, and sometimes he'll make the photograph black and white, sometimes he'll add gradients to the photograph in various places, and he'll also add text to his posters and some other graphics in here, and so it creates a really cool effect. It also gives it a really modern and really artistic and colorful look. So I'll show you guys how to accomplish this look in today's tutorial using GIMP 2.10.4, and as of the time of this tutorial, this is the latest version of GIMP. But of course, before we get into that, I want to direct you guys over to my website at daviesmediadesign.com. We've got tons of GIMP video and text tutorials on here, as well as Project Translate, GIMP playlists, and of course our poll of the week results, so definitely check that out. You can also enroll in our bestseller GIMP photo editing course from beginner to pro photo retoucher, and I'll include a link to this as well as all of the relevant links from this tutorial in the description. So here's a closer look at Magdiel Lopez's work. Here's his Instagram here, and of course I'll link to his Instagram in the description so you guys can see what his style is in these posters here. He did like a poster a day challenge, and so he's got a poster that he created almost every single day, I think for like a year or so. I think he didn't stay consistent with it for the entire year, but he did for most of it, so you can see all of his posters on here. He also has a website, and I'll link to that as well, and this has even more of his work. And so here's a poster right here that's similar to the composition we're going to be creating today. So as you can see, it has a gradient background, and then it has various gradient shapes here behind the model, and then the model's sunglasses have gradients in them, and then the clothing as well is also turned into a gradient. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started, and I'm going to start by opening up the main image I used of the model. So I'll go to File. If you haven't opened it before, go ahead and download it. I'll include a link to the photo that I'm using for this tutorial in the description. I got it for free on Pixabay. In my case, I'm going to go to Open Recent and go ahead and open the file. So here's the original file, and you'll see I downloaded the larger file. So this is the 5,616 pixel by 3,744. So make sure you download that one on Pixabay. And once you've got it opened up into GIMP, go ahead and right click and go to Add Alpha Channel. That will ensure that this has a transparent background behind it, so that when you do erase the elements in this photo, a transparent background will show up instead of a solid color background. And we're going to erase the background using a layer mask. So I'm going to right click and go to Add Layer Mask. And under Initialize Layer Mask 2, I'm just going to choose White Full Opacity and click Add. And that's going to add a white layer mask to this. And so now I can grab a paintbrush, go ahead and choose black as my color and click OK. I've got my hardness for my brush set to around 50, and then you can adjust the size here using a combination of the size slider and the brackets on your keyboard. And so I just went around, this is sort of the, I guess you can call it the old-fashioned way, and just erase this background manually using a layer mask. There's other ways out there to erase backgrounds. It's a little more challenging when your background isn't a solid color, like a studio background or something that's pure white or pure black or whatever. So for this, I recommend just using your paintbrush tool and going through and erasing the background by hand like I am using a layer mask. And when you get into the tighter spaces here, for instance like right here or around the fingers, all you have to do is grab your paintbrush tool and decrease the size of your brush, and again you can use the brackets on your keyboard, and just go ahead and adjust the size as you go to erase the details here. And if you erase too much like that, just go ahead and hit this icon here, and that'll change your colors to black and white. And then you can hit X to switch over to white here and just paint anything back that you accidentally erased that you didn't want erased. And then you can hit X again to switch back to black, and then go ahead and go back to erasing some of the details here. So I'm not going to go through this because I already did this earlier, but you guys get the point there. So this is what your final product will look like once you've erased the background. So once you have your image with the background erased, go ahead and create a new composition. So go to File, New, and I'm going to go ahead and change this to inches and make sure this is set to 8.5 by 11, and that is just a standard US paper size. And then you can change the advanced options. I have this set to 300 ppi, which is better for print, and I'll click OK. All right, so now we have this new composition. Right now it has a black background. I'm just going to go ahead and create a new layer, and I'll just name this background hit enter. Because this is already named background, this will just go on as background number 1. But we can go ahead and delete this background and change the name of this to background. So now we have a transparent background. And I'll come back over here to our image of the girl with no background. And I'm going to drag it over into our composition here. And then drop it on top of the canvas right here. So I'll go ahead and release my mouse. And you'll see our image will be dropped into this composition here. And now I want to decrease the size of it because right now it's a little too large. So I'll grab my scale tool and then click on the composition here and just drag it down, and that will scale it. And if yours isn't scaling proportionately, just make sure this icon here is linked. I don't want to scale it down too much, so I'll just scale that back up a little bit. And by the way, make sure the interpolation here is set to low halo or no halo for the best results. And so I'm going to scale this to about right there. And then I'm using this center set of squares here to just go ahead and center this on our composition. And once you have it centered in place and you have it at the size you want, go ahead and hit scale. And that will go ahead and scale down the layer with the model on it. All right, once we've done that, I'm going to go to layer, crop to content, and that'll crop my layer down to the size of the girl here. And then I'll grab my alignment tool, click on her, and then I'll just click to center align this so it's more precisely center aligned. The next thing I'm going to do is add my gradient background. So I'm going to come over here to my background layer and I'm going to grab my gradient tool. The first thing I want to do is choose my gradient color. So I've already pre-selected these colors beforehand. And so you can copy my HTML notation here if you want to use the same colors as me. So this is what I'll use for my foreground color. And then I'll go ahead and use this for my background color and click OK. And I've got the mode set to normal, opacity 100. Right here I've got my gradients set to foreground and background RGB. And then I've got the shape set to linear. And I'm going to go ahead and start from the top and just hold Control and drag to the bottom. And that'll just make sure that my gradient is drawn as a straight line. I actually want to reverse the colors here, so I'll just go ahead and click this arrow here. And if you're using GIMP 2.10 or above and you don't have the instant mode selected, you can live edit the gradient as I just did. Then you can go ahead and just grab another tool like the move tool and that will apply this gradient. And now we have a nice gradient background behind our model. The next thing I'm going to do is add a guide to this because I'm going to add some shapes on here and I want the shapes to be able to be center aligned, or at least some of them should be center aligned on the composition. So I'll grab a guide here by clicking on the rulers and dragging. And I'm going to place it close to the center, but it's not exact. And I'll just grab my alignment tool, click on that guide there, and then click to center align it right here. And make sure this is set to relative to image, by the way. So this is now center aligned here on our composition. And I'll create a new layer, and I'm just going to name this gradient square. And make sure the fill width is set to transparency here and click OK. And I do have this below my main model layer, and I'm actually going to change the name of this layer real quick to model. So I'll click on this gradient square layer. And by the way, you can click on this zoom image icon here, and that'll just zoom in on your image so that the top and bottom perfectly align inside of your viewing window. So I'll grab my rectangle select tool here, and I'm just going to go ahead and draw a rectangle. It's not really any particular size. It's just, you know, eyeballed and whatever size you guys want it to be. I'll just make it a little bit wider here. And I'm snapping that plus sign in the middle of my rectangle to that guide we drew to ensure that this is basically center aligned on our image. And I actually want to make this a little bit wider, so I'm just going to hover over the bottom part of this rectangle and drag this down. And you'll see that allows us to resize this. All right, next thing I want to do is fill this in with my gradient. So I'll grab my gradient tool again, and I'm going to go ahead and change my gradient colors. And by the way, I've inputted all my gradient colors for this tutorial just to save time. So I'm going to click on here and use this red. You can copy the HTML notation here, and I'll click OK. And then I'm going to grab this purple color here, same thing. And I'm just going to click and drag this and hold Control, and that'll draw this in straight line mode again. And I'm going to go ahead and flip my colors back because I do want the reddish color on top and the purplish color on the bottom. And then I'll just go ahead and grab my move tool, and that will apply the gradient. And now we have this cool gradient here behind our model. So next I'm just going to create another gradient. So I'm going to create a new layer, and I'll just name this gradient rectangle this time. I named that one gradient square even though it's more of a rectangle, but that's okay. So gradient rectangle. And I'm going to grab my rectangle select tool again, And I'm going to grab a guide again from here and just align it to the outsides of this other rectangle I drew, just so everything is sort of the same, width as this rectangle. And so I'm going to go ahead and grab a guide from the top here and bring it down and grab another one. And the reason I'm doing this is because I'm going to be creating multiple shapes and I want them to be the same height basically. So once I've done that, I'm going to grab my rectangle select tool again and then just click and draw this. And I'm going to go ahead and change my colors here. So I'll grab this green color here and click OK. And then I actually need a blue color, which I forgot to save here. So I'll just go ahead and manually type this in and click OK. You guys can copy that HTML notation there. And so I'll grab my gradient tool and go ahead and draw from left to right, holding Control, and I'll hit Enter. And right now you can only see the green, but we're going to create another new layer. I'll just name this gradient rectangle small 2, click OK. And I'm going to grab my rectangle select tool again. And this one I'm just going to draw a smaller shape and grab my gradient tool and go ahead and draw this one, holding Control again, and I'll hit Enter. So now we have these rectangle shapes here. And I'll go to Select None. And I'm going to draw another shape up top here, so I'm going to create a new layer, and we'll name this Yellow Gradient. And then I'll grab my rectangle select tool, and I'll draw it about here. And this one's just going to be like a longer, skinnier rectangle. And if you want, you can move it so that it overlaps with some of the model here just to give it some dimension. And I'm just going to change the color to this yellow color. And I'll save this blue before I forget. And I don't think we need it again, but anyway, I'm going to grab this color here. And oh, by the way, you can copy the HTML notation for this color. And then here is the yellow for the foreground. And I'll grab the gradient tool again. And same thing, hold Control, and I just drag it from the far left guide here to the far right guide, and then I'll hit Enter, and I'll go to Select None, and now we've got that yellow gradient rectangle there. And I actually do want to give this rectangle some room that we just made, so I'm going to come down here to the main gradient square rectangle, right click, and go to Alpha to Selection, and then I'm going to grab my rectangle select tool, click on this, and then drag this down so it's a little smaller. And then I can go to Control-I or Command-I. That'll select everything outside. And then I'll just hit the Delete key, and that will delete all that excess there. And then I'll go to Select None, and now we've got a little bit more room there. And if we want, we can grab this yellow gradient and move it down. I'm just going to change the size of the layer for this so the layer isn't the entire size of the composition. So go to Layer, Crop to Content, and that'll shrink the layer down to the size of that rectangle. Then I'll grab the Move tool and click on this, hold Control, and just move it down slightly, just a tiny bit. And of course, we can repeat the cropping of the layer for the other shapes, and that'll just sort of help to just shrink everything down and make it a little bit more manageable. So I'm going to come over here to our main gradient square layer, go to Layer, Crop to Content, and you'll see that the layer now cropped to the size of this rectangle here. And I'll do the same here, so Layer, Crop to Content, and then here as well, Layer, Cropped Content. The last rectangle shape I'm going to create are going to be some of the white lines that I put down here. So I'm going to create a new layer, and I'm going to name this White Lines, and make sure the fill width is set to transparency, and click OK. And now I'm going to grab my ellipse select tool again, and I'm just going to create some smaller rectangles here. So I'm actually just going to create one, and let me zoom in on it. And I'm going to grab my bucket fill tool and go ahead and change the color here to white. And then I'll go ahead and fill that in and go to Select None. But once I've done that, I'm going to duplicate this main layer. So I'll duplicate it twice. And I'll grab my Move tool, and I'm going to click and hold Control and then just drag this down. And then click and hold Control and drag this down. And I just eyeballed that. If you need to adjust these, you can click on one and then use the arrows on your keyboard to adjust the position. And then I'm just going to come over here, right click on the top one, and go to Merge Down. And I'll do that one more time. And now all of these white lines are on one layer here, as you can see. And I'll grab my Zoom tool and go ahead and hold Control and zoom out. And just zoom in one time. And now we can sort of see the progress that we've made so far. All right, so the next step is I'm going to convert the model to black and white. So I'm going to click on this model layer and go to Colors, desaturate, desaturate, and I'm going to set the desaturation mode to luminance and just go ahead and click OK. And I want to add a little bit of contrast to this and sort of add a little bit more tonal range to the black and white. So what I'm going to do is first adjust the levels of this. So I'll go to Colors, Levels, and now we can adjust our levels, and the goal here is just to sort of add a little bit more contrast between the blacks, whites, and grays in here and just make this look a little bit better. And you can do a preview. So here's before and here's after. So really I've just made some minute changes, and I'll click OK. And the Curves tool is always a great way to add contrast. So I'll go to Colors, Curves, and I'll click in the middle of my curve here and then click in the middle of this portion. And as you guys know, by creating an S curve, you can create a little bit more contrast. So I'm just clicking and dragging this point down a little bit, clicking and dragging this point up a little bit, and now we've got a little more contrast. So I'll go ahead and click OK. And now that this model is in black and white, we want to make her sunglasses have the gradient circle in them. First thing I'm going to do is just hide these guides to get them out of the way. So I'll go to Control-Shift-T, and that is the shortcut key to hide the guides. So I'll grab my zoom tool and just zoom in on the sunglasses here, and I'll create a new layer and just name this sunglasses. Make sure the fill width is set to transparency and click OK. And now I'm going to grab my ellipse select tool, and I'm just going to draw this pretty roughly around the sunglasses and release, and make sure the mode is set to add to current selection because we're going to draw a second one here in a second. But I'm going to just drag the corners of this, and what I'm trying to do is align the shape of this ellipse to the shape of the lenses in the sunglasses here. And this doesn't have to be exact, but you do want it to be pretty close. So once you've done that, go ahead and start on the second one here. And again, this will only work if the mode is set to add to current selection. And so I'm just trying to get the shape as exact as possible, but it's not going to be perfect in the end. Alright, so once you're happy with the shape, what I'm going to do is grab my zoom tool and zoom out. So we want the lenses in the sunglasses to be the same color as the gradient behind the model. So I'm going to go ahead and change it back to those colors. So we had this red color here for the foreground, and then we had this purple color for the background. And I'll grab the blend tool, and I'm going to draw this same gradient, but instead of drawing it in the direction of the current gradient, I'm going to draw it in the direction that her head is leaning, and that way it sort of looks like the same gradient is being captured in the sunglasses, but it's being tilted. And I'm going to go ahead and click this arrow here to reverse it so that they're in the same direction. And then I'll go ahead and grab the move tool, and that will apply our gradient. And if you go to select none, you can see that the sunglass lenses now have the color of this gradient, but it looks really artificial right now. And so to change that, I'm going to click on our layer, and I'm going to change the mode to screen. And what that will do is it will allow basically the reflections from the sunglasses to come through the color of the gradient, but it still keeps a lot of the color qualities of the gradient, so I think that looks pretty cool. So if you zoom out here, you can see now this is really starting to bring our poster to life here. The next thing I want to do is go ahead and add a gradient to her clothing here, so I'm going to zoom in on the clothing. I did a pretty rough outline of this, and actually let me zoom out once holding the control key. So I did a pretty rough outline of the clothing here, and it still looked pretty good. So the more time you spend on this, as always, the better it will look. And so what I'm going to do is just use my lasso tool, and you could set the mode to just replace the current selection or add to the current selection. Either one will work. And I'm going to outline her shirt that she's wearing here. And you'll see for the sake of time I've done a very rough outline, but I'll go ahead and hit the enter key. Make sure you connected the last points, by the way, the first and last. And I just dragged my mouse the entire way. That's how I outline that. But now I'm going to create a new layer, and I'll name this shirt gradient, and I'll hit OK. And I want the gradient of the shirt to be the same as the gradient of the background, so I'll go ahead and create another gradient, and I'll choose that purple we used originally, and then for the background, I'll go ahead and choose that yellowish skin color and click OK. And then I'll grab my gradient tool and go ahead and draw the gradient holding the control key. I'll go ahead and flip this just so this is in the right direction, and then I'll grab my move tool to apply it, and I'll grab my zoom tool and zoom out. Obviously that doesn't look great right now. I'm going to start by going to select none, but then I'm going to click on this shirt gradient layer and change the mode to overlay, and that will overlay that gradient color onto the shirt and help it blend in a little bit. I'm going to zoom in right here. This was pretty rough. I know the whole thing was rough, but this one's a little too rough to let go. So let me just grab my eraser tool and sort of blend that a little bit. You guys could spend more time on yours to make it look a little bit better than mine. But I'll grab the zoom tool, hold control, and zoom out. The next thing I'm going to do is add a shadow. So I had a shadow coming off of our main model here onto the background and the shapes. And that's something that Magdiel Lopez does. Like for instance, right here, you'll see there's a shadow coming off the model. In his case, he only has the shadow on the shape itself. So to create the shadow, I'm going to come over to our model layer, right click and go to alpha to selection. And that's going to create a selection around the outline of our model there. Then I'm going to create a new layer and I'll name this shadow. And I'll hit enter. And now I'm going to grab my bucket fill tool. I'll click on this icon here to change this to black and white. And then I'll go ahead and fill this in with black. And I'll go to select none. Then I'll go to filters, blur, Gaussian blur. And I'm just going to blur this because I don't want the edges of this to be too crisp. And I'll click OK. Then I'll grab my move tool and I'm going to offset this a little bit. And actually let me move the shadow layer below the model layer, and that will allow us to see where we're moving the shadow layer. So I'm going to offset it like that. And this is too prominent right now, so I'm going to change the mode to overlay. And now it looks like we've got a shadow going on the background here. If you want it to be like Magdiel Lopez does and just have it be on the shape, you can right click and go to alpha to selection, then go to select invert, and then click on your shadow layer and hit the delete key, go to select none, and now the shadow is only on that main shape there. So the last thing I'm going to do with these shapes before we get into the text is I'm going to click on the main background and I'm going to add a little bit of noise to the background. And so to do that, I'll go to filters, noise, and I'll choose hurl. And this is way too strong, so I'm going to change the randomization down to 10%, and I'll keep repeat at 1 and go ahead and click OK. And that will apply the noise to the background there. So now I'm going to go ahead and add my text in here, and I want to bring back my guide, so I'll go to Control-Shift-T, and then I'll bring these guides back. And I'm going to bring a guide down here at the top because I'm going to align some text at the top. But I'll grab my text tool and I'm going to start with the easy text, so I'll click on here. And Magdiel Lopez always names his compositions, so I'll just name mine. And I just named this one Fashion Future, just a random name. And I'm going to click on this until it selects all the text and just come over here and increase the size of the font. And I'm actually going to decrease the separation I put in here. And let me increase this a little bit more, the font size, 75. And then I'll just put my Twitter handle on here. So I'll do all caps, Davies Media DES. And I'll go ahead and click on here to select all the text. And you'll know all the text is selected because it'll have a yellow box around each text. And I'm just going to shrink this down to, I think I did 40 or 49. And then I'll grab my move tool and move this until it aligns with that left guide, and then move it underneath this first piece of text here. And then because this was part of like a series of daily posters he was creating, he always numbered his posters. And because we're celebrating 20,000 subscribers right now, instead of numbering this, I'm just going to put 20K. And then I'm going to click on this to select all the text. And I'm going to increase the size of this to around 170, maybe 175. And then grab the move tool and move this into place. And I'm going to align this so that the top of these letters align with the top of the Fashion Future letters here. So just eyeball that there. And now I've got 3 pieces of text left. So I've got the date that this was created, and then I've got the name of the series that I'm putting, which is just 20K Celebration. That was the name I came up with. And then the sort of copyright information down at the bottom. And for 2 of these pieces of text, they need to be vertical. And what I'm going to do first is I'm going to change the size of the text to 49. And then I'm going to change the color to white and click OK. And I'm going to increase the spacing to 30. And I'm just going to type the date of this, so July 23rd, 2018, and I'll move this to the very top here so we could see it. Now this is one of the texts that I want to be vertical. So to do that, I'm going to grab my paths tool, and I'm just going to click and create 2 points along this guide here so it's a straight line path. And then I'm going to unhide the path. And then I'm going to grab my text tool and click on my text and then right click on it and go to text along path. And that'll create a path that outlines my text so it's the same shape of my text. But I need to come over to my paths and you'll see the text path here. Click on that and then go to path to selection here. And that will outline that text that was just created. And then come over to your layers panel, create a new layer. And I just named these layers the same name as my text, so July 23rd, 2018, and click OK. And then I'll grab my bucket fill tool and go ahead and make sure you are hovered over inside the selection area of the text and click, and that'll fill that in. Go to select none, come over to your path and hide the path. And then like we did on those other layers, I'll click on that layer and go to layer, crop to content, and that'll crop the layer down, make it more manageable. Grab the zoom tool, zoom in, grab the move tool, and go ahead and just move this into place wherever you want it. And now we can hide this other text here, and so all we have is this vertical text. So grab the zoom tool and zoom out, and now we've got that text there. We're going to repeat that process one more time. So we'll create new text, and this text I just typed in 20K celebration, and make sure celebration is in all caps. And I want to create a path down here, so I'll just grab a path tool and draw this path like we did before on this guideline here. And then unhide the path. Come back to your 20K celebration text layer, grab your text tool, click on the text box to activate it, right click and go to text along path. And there you've got your text. Come over to your paths and click on path to selection. And that'll select that text shape. And then create a new layer, and we'll name this 20K celebration, same as our text. And then grab the bucket fill tool, fill this in with white, make sure you're hovered inside of the selection area. Go to select none. Hide this path here, and you can also hide the straight line path here and this straight line path. So all the paths are hidden now. And click on this layer, go to layer, crop to content. Then we'll grab the zoom tool and zoom in. Grab the move tool, click on this and move it over a little bit. And then we'll just zoom out. And we could probably move this text up a little bit as well, like that. And then we can hide this original 20K celebration text layer. All right, so we've got the two vertical texts here. We'll just create one last piece of text, which will be the normal horizontal text. And this is like the copyright information, so I'll keep my caps lock on and I'll just put Davies Media Design. Instead of the copyright symbol, I just did a straight line there, which is the shift and the backslash key. And then I'll type 2018. And I'll go ahead and grab my alignment tool, click on this text box, and then I will go ahead and click to align this relative to the center of the image. So grab the zoom tool and zoom out, and now we have our finished poster. I'll go ahead and hit Control-Shift-T, and that'll hide all of our guides there. And then you can grab the zoom tool and just zoom in so that this fits into the canvas window. All right, so that's it for this tutorial. If you liked it, please subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/daviesmediadesign. You can also visit our website at daviesmediadesign.com, and you can enroll in our GIMP photo editing course from beginner to pro photo retoucher, and I'll include a link to that as well as all the relevant links from this tutorial in the description. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.